You are listening to Claret and Blue, an Aston Villa podcast brought to you by Birmingham Live. There it is, the old intro's back. I'm sick of moaning. Don't you start. So many people moaning in the last episode. You can't please all the people all the time. So I thought, you know what? I'm having an easy life. I'm going back to what it used to be, and that is it now. It's never changing again, so deal with it if you don't like it. Hello. Welcome to the Claret and Blue podcast. I'm Dan Rolinson, your aggressive host to begin with there, joined by Matt Kendrick. Matt, how are you?
I'm all right, yeah. I'm all right. I'm mellow now. Now I've listened to that nice, relaxing music. Yeah.
Let's move on from the music. We're here today to do another little episode of our Beyond the Podcast. So we did this last time when we went 500 million miles to Cornwall and back to speak to the legends of 1982, and we thought we kind of needed a behind-the-scenes podcast to go with it. Now, unfortunately, this one doesn't have behind-the-scenes footage like we had for the Cornwall one, because I wasn't prepared to do the extra stuff, because the day itself of filming with Martin O'Neill was a bit hectic. But there's been loads of comments on the podcast, and it's been very well received, obviously, in the last week or so. I think it was last Wednesday we did it, I think. And the first comment that kind of prompted this, and we always said we were going to do some kind of behind-the-scenes, but there was a comment from a guy called Black Rum. He said, "Now I'm intrigued to hear Matt's post-interview thoughts. What did he genuinely take away from the experience? Does he have a better insight, or is it still as prickly as it sounded in the interview?" So before we get into any kind of specifics, how do you feel about the interview now, 1 week on? Are you happy with it? Do you think we could have done more? What are you kind of overarching thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm pleased with it. I've been really, really chuffed with the response that we've had to it. It's gained a lot of views quite quickly, and like you said, the comments on the whole have been positive about the interview, positive about the way that O'Neill came across, positive about I think somebody described it as a bit like an electrical storm. I think my relationship with Martin and how it was how it came across. So the regret, and I think we said this at the time, we've probably been a little bit harsh on ourselves, was that it lasted 45 minutes when we probably could have done twice that easily. Probably could have split it into 4 or 5 parts. And I felt initially when we left the room that probably could have probed a little bit more about when the first cracks started to appear in his relationship with Randy Lerner. But we didn't have time to do that. And the feedback that we've got, I think people are genuinely pleased that he's actually come out and said things that he's not said before, but he's spoken in more detail about his departure from Aston Villa with us on that podcast than he has before. So perhaps we shouldn't worry too much about what we didn't ask and just be kind of grateful that we got a good interview where he did finally answer some questions.
Well, I think I'm always pretty harsh on my own work. That's just in my nature. I always want to improve. I will look back on it and go,
most of the time, that's probably what.
Oh, all right, fair enough. I'll look at it and think, I could have filmed this slightly different, could have tried this, could have done that. But when I first came out, I think on the car ride home, we were kind of assessing it between us, what we thought we'd got in the bag before we'd kind of looked at the edit of it. And I was saying it kind of 6.5, 7 out of 10. Like, it's good, but it probably could be better. We needed more time. That's the biggest kind of takeaway, of course. But it's that kind of insight that we know what it could have been, whereas the audience only see that 45 minutes and just take it as read as that was it. That was everything. Whereas I know that we basically skipped an entire page of questions. So for us, there's literally questions unanswered because we prepared the stuff, or you prepared the stuff, and it was like, right, you've got about 10 minutes left. And it was like, oh, this piece of paper. All right, let's get rid of all those questions then. Let's just skip ahead a little bit. So for me, I was thinking it's good. I'm pretty happy with what we've got, but I know it could have been better. First of all, you wrote a piece about it as well, and you kind of started off by mentioning the Sunderland press conference from a few years ago and the kind of animosity between the two of you and what changed since that. So do you just want to share with us a little bit about how the interview came about and your initial reaction to, is this actually going to happen or not?
Yeah, so the last time it wasn't the last time I'd been in a room with Martin O'Neill, but the last time I'd spoken to Martin O'Neill was back in, I think it was April 2012, when he came back as Sunderland manager. It was his first trip to Villa Park. Villa drawn 0-0. Craig Gardner got sent off. It was a fairly unremarkable game. And at the end of the game, in the press conference, I let everybody else have their questions first of all. What did you think of the match? Blah, 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 blah. And then I heard him say the word sorry in a completely different context, being the irritating little fool that I am. Irritating git, to use Martin's words, that I am. I pounced and I said, "Hi, Martin. I heard you said the word sorry. I didn't quite understand what context you were saying it in. Did you were you apologising for the timing and manner of your departure from Aston Villa?" And honestly, he flew out of his seat. He started kind of wagging his finger at me. "If you don't mind, I won't take a question from you." And I kind of, just being a bit mischievous, said, "I don't mind. Can I invite one of my colleagues to ask it on my behalf?" And he just stormed out. So when we've spoken about the prospect of getting Martin O'Neill to tell his story on a Villa podcast, it was very, I think you put at the start of the podcast, didn't you, us speculating that it probably wouldn't happen. A mutual contact of ours, of mine and O'Neill, somebody who is helping him promote his book, just sent me a message out of the blue a couple of weeks ago saying, "Do you fancy interviewing Martin O'Neill?" And I just checked to say, "Is this an April Fool? Is this real? Is it really genuine?" And he said it was. And all of a sudden, I had Martin O'Neill's new Twitter account following me on Twitter. So it all started coming together. I checked with his contact of mine, will we be able to discuss the things we want to discuss? The exit, his feelings all these years on, some of the things that contributed towards it. And he said, "Yeah, go for it." You know, he's got a book to promote, which always helps, doesn't it? He's got a book to promote. He touches on some of those things in his book anyway. And he's in a place whereby the passage of time makes him confident enough to give his take on it after all these years. So that's how it all came about.
Yeah, I remember you sent me a voice note, I think, saying,
"This is not a wind-up. I'll repeat, this is not a wind-up." I think I'm very close to getting Martin O'Neill on the podcast. Yeah, I'm as shocked as you are.
Surely not. It's like you're at this point, you're having me on. If someone's having you on, you've had me on as well. Because I just thought if he is ever going to do it, it might be a StreamYard thing and it'll be Ash or one of us having to do it because he won't speak to you, is the kind of narrative I've always believed, because you didn't get on and that would be that. Going back to the YouTube comments, there was, again, loads of stuff saying, "Oh, what a coup this is. Well done for getting him on. This is fantastic," from a guy here called Shadow. "Wow, how did you get him on?" And somebody replied underneath, "He has a book to flog." People like use that as a bit of a stick to beat us with, going, "Oh, you've only got him on the podcast because he's promoting a book." It's like, well, that's media. That's how a lot of these relationships work. No one's going to Jonathan Ross's show to speak to Jonathan Ross. It's because to promote their new TV series next week. That's part and parcel of the give and take of the interview in the interviewee, isn't it? You've got something to promote. We want to hear your story as well. So, like you said in that story you wrote, we're not naive enough to think that Martin O'Neill went, "You know what, let's rekindle an old flame with Matt Kendrick. I want to go and have it out with him and have a chat." He wants to use our audience to promote his book, which is absolutely fair enough. And the link's down below if you want to go and buy it. But for us, we get one of our most viewed podcasts out of it, and an exclusive with Martin O'Neill, who's not done a Villa podcast ever before. He's done another one since, and he might do another couple in the future, perhaps. But he's not spoken about his time at Villa in that detail before. And as much as we came away thinking we could have asked more, we could have said this, we could have said that, what we did get is an exclusive that's not been said before. So yes, we'll scratch his back and promote the book. But that's just the way it works, isn't it?
Yeah, he's promoting his book. That's the way the way the world works. But what I would say is I've had a few people. And listen, I'm not suddenly going to become an advocate for Martin O'Neill and say that what he did was perfectly fine, and all of a sudden, he's my favourite ever person again. But what I would say is when people are saying he's only showing regret and contrition because he's selling the book, I don't believe that bit, because from the bits that I've known of Martin O'Neill, from my personal experience with him down the years, he wants this book to sell, but he's still going to be able to heat his house. And you know what I mean? To afford to put turkey on the table for Christmas. So it's not a purely financial thing. He doesn't need to change his tune so much to sell this book that he would come out and say things publicly that he doesn't believe in. I think the contrition that we saw was a man who's had 12 years to think about. That was probably as good as I don't mean as good as my career got. He had great times at Celtic, and I'm sure he was proud to manage the Republic of Ireland, but that was a missed opportunity. He's had 12 years now to think, if I could have just processed my emotions and dealt with my frustrations better, that could have been, I could have really gone on, despite the constraints, I could have gone and achieved something. So I think that is genuine Martin O'Neill looking back, with the Monday morning quarterback, was it? Or the benefit of hindsight and retrospect, and thinking, I got that wrong. And he's he's effectively admitted much. And I didn't turn up to that interview at Birmingham who Mal Mason last Wednesday thinking that he was going to come out and say I was wrong.
The bottom line is that if you're asking me now, And in fact, even if you'd asked me maybe a year after events, then, I would certainly have. I would have stayed on at the football club, pushed on, and I wouldn't have been. People said, "Oh, it's because it was he was asking for more money," which is an absolute myth. The myth. It wasn't the case. I did say to Randy that at some stage or another, you will get your money back for the likes of James Milner, Ashley Young and Stuart Downing, and you will make some money in those deals. Let us try and push on, which they did do. I was expecting perhaps more from the likes of Sidwell and Nigel Reo-Coker, at the time, really expecting that. So, but overall, I thought we had a squad capable of, would certainly be in the top 6. Can we push into those last 2 positions? That was it. But this idea that I was asking for a lot more than that, there was simply not true.
I've not read the whole Villa section. We got sent I got sent to him via you a little bit of the book as a bit of research prep, whatever. I think the day before that we were doing it, and I read through it kind of with bated breath, wondering, what does he say? What's in there? And when we were doing the podcast, there was some things that he started to talk about and some stories he started to tell were not word for word for the book, but you can tell like he's on the press junket. He's told this story before. That's that bit from the book that I've read. Like there's those little snippets. There's a chapter on Villa in his book, and it's, I don't know however many pages it is. There's a 40-minute podcast with us, and there's more. He says more in more detail in the podcast than he does in the book, in the snippets that I've read. So for this kind of argument of, he's only ever going to say what he's already written down in the book already, isn't strictly true, because the podcast allows him to go into greater detail. Just on his kind of persona during that interview, there's a couple of comments. One from Claret, who said he seemed very defensive, and another from Rusty Shackelford, who says, I found it odd how he wasn't actually answering any of the questions and was just saying what he wanted to talk about. To me, that felt a little bit, again, being on the press junket, talking about these things a lot, having all these stories racing around his head and trying to get as much out as possible. But there was times where I just thought, you've not quite answered the question there. You've gone down your own garden path and spoke about something else. And you told me afterwards that kind of is Martin O'Neill.
I think in terms of him being scattergun, he's always traditionally been very difficult to transcribe when you go to a press conference, because he would start a sentence and then do a double up, double back, and then come back in a different direction. Defensive, he's come along with some pre-prepared stuff that's in his book that he wants to talk about. I actually found that the question, even if I asked the question and it got a slightly different answer, the answer was interesting enough that I either didn't need to or didn't remember to guide him back on track, to be honest. I don't know about defensive. He's a proud man, isn't he? The Kale one, I suppose, is the one, isn't it? When he's talking, obviously Kale's retired this week. Yeah. A very decorated player with what he's won and what he's gone on to achieve. And he's clearly got that kind of pre-rehearsed in terms of, Gary Cahill wasn't that player back then. I don't think he was ready. He went via Bolton. So he's not going to come out and say he got everything wrong, is he? Yeah. You know what I mean? I think he's come out and said he got the big one wrong, which was leaving Villa when he did and the manner he did. Martin O'Neill, as far as I'm aware, in the last 12 years, and my experience, has split Villa fans in terms of there's those who have never seen anything better than what we achieved under O'Neill, because they're of that generation, probably yourself.
Yeah.
And there's those who felt that it was spiteful what he did, and almost whatever he achieved or threatened to achieve at Villa, the gloss has gone, like the legacy is tainted. But I think it was important for us, and I wrote this, it was important for us to reflect both sides. We probably could have, and I'll possibly regret that I didn't go more down this in terms of the breakdown of the relationship. Probably could have gone harder and more focused on the end of it and what he's thought since and that kind of thing. But I felt we had a duty to reflect some of the good times, some of the players that he signed, some of the players that he improved, some of the things that he achieved in terms of successive European finishes and Wembley appearances, cup finals, semi-finals. I hope, and the comments that we've had seem to reflect it, that we did do a fairly rounded job on it, really. It
was a very conscious conversation that you and me had beforehand as well. How do we approach kind of the structure of it? How do we film it? What order do we do things in? And we first initially, you came to me and said, do we almost start at the end and talk about the leaving first and get a good 20-minute chunk on that, and then go, we've kind of got the bad stuff out of the way, let's talk about the cup finals and the players you sign and whatever else. But when you actually, and again, this is the difference between, you'll see a comment saying you should have been harder on this, or you should have asked that. Once you're in the room and you've obviously got this spiky relationship as well, you're not just going to sit down and go, right, Martin, let's talk about how you left and how you ruined Aston Villa for 10 years. Because you've got to have some kind of rapport and build something up. So in the end, we decided, right, let's do it kind of semi-chronologically and start with the good times, and then the good times for half an hour, and then the ending for half an hour or so. That was kind of the rough plan. But then I think you asked him a question about who his favourite signing was or something in the first 3 or 4 minutes, and then he started to talk about how he left straight away. And in hindsight, that was probably the time to go, well, you've mentioned leaving, let's go down that route now. But we weren't.
Danger, Dan. Sorry to cut across you. There's a danger. I didn't know what he was like the last time I spoke to him. He walked out the room. So I didn't want to go too much sticking the knife in from the first 10 minutes in case we lost him. You know, in case he stormed.
That would have been a great podcast.
It would have made good telly, wouldn't it? It would have made good telly. But I wanted an hour, and we got 45 minutes. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good experience. It was quite cathartic for me, to be honest. I could sit down in a room and discuss those things with him, and it was spiking. Some people have said, "Oh, Matt, he clearly hates you." Yeah,
I've got that comment here. Yeah, who was that from? Southpaw. It might be me, but I get the vibe that Martin might hate Matt.
Yeah, so there's that. There's some people have said there's clearly grudging respect from both of you. I'm just glad about the opportunity. I didn't think that opportunity was gonna come along, and it was interesting. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think you're going to ask me this, but I'll answer it anyway, or half answer it.
Sounds like Martin O'Neill.
I don't know. I don't know what I think. No, I think
you've kind of mellowed on him a bit more now, and you can kind of see his side of the story a little bit better.
I just think what a crying shame. And I think what we did 2 years ago when we discussed, and I probably was a little bit more harsh on him then than I was when I sat in front of his face a week ago. We described it, didn't we, as the Aston Villa, what was it, the Aston Villa decision or the Aston Villa fallout where nobody wins? And I think that's nailed it. Nobody's won. Yeah. Villa was still, and when we hope that Unai Emery is the man, Villa are still counting the cost of 12 years worth of chaos and mismanagement with a couple of pockets of improvement in there. And O'Neill is still clearly a man with a massive regret for what's gone on. So I think my biggest feeling is that, yeah, he's acknowledged it. He's acknowledged that it was wrong. But nobody comes out of it particularly well. You know, Randy Lerner, you know, we take O'Neill's word for it that's what something forced him out. So why shouldn't it be what the account that O'Neill's given us? So if you're not going to keep James Milner, sign Scott Parker, and stick to your promise, why say it? You know, why is that conversation? Why is that decision had to be had in August? Why is there not a very clear? And I think O'Neill alluded to the fact that I think he went to Lerner's house, which is kind of in the countryside, I think near Bodymore, or was, at the end of the season, and they tried to kind of soften the stance and clear the air a little bit. That should have been that meeting then. Two grown men, very experienced businessmen and a very experienced football man, should have had an idea exactly what budget they had, exactly what they expected 2010-11 season to look like. That shouldn't have been allowed to drag into the start of August. And I suppose where I've changed, I thought O'Neill should have made the decision. If he knew all this was happening, he should have gone with his head high. End of May, we got to the League Cup final in the March. We'd got to the FA Cup semi-final at Wembley. We'd finished sixth. We'd got a few more points, I think. We were knocking on the door of the top four. He could have gone then and said, listen, this is as far as I can take the club. I've been told that the parameters are going to change. It's going to be difficult for me to maintain, let alone improve what I've done. But I'm not sure whether O'Neill knew that at that stage then. I'm not sure whether that had been communicated clearly enough to him. It was 3 months too long. It should have been cleared a lot sooner. So I don't necessarily forgive O'Neill for leaving it and going when he did. But I probably do understand it a little bit more.
Just on the structure quickly, the comment from Flat Bat, who said, love this podcast. You can hear the intelligence in every answer O'Neill gives. He seems like a really engaging person to have a bit of back and forth with. For someone who's in their mid-20s, he'll forever be my favourite Villa manager, depending on what Unai Emery does. And that was kind of the key point for me. My kind of, when you came to me and said, let's start at the end, my kind of rebuttal to that was, he had 3 good years, and people who were born in the mid-90s and too young for the success of the mid-90s under Brian Little, Big Ron. Martin O'Neill is the best manager we've had in terms of league position and stuff up until hopefully Unai Emery going forward, and we've had the Dean Smith promotion and stuff. But between O'Neill and promotion, pretty much nothing happened of any note to get excited about. So we've got to kind of respect the 3 good years of O'Neill rather than just going mental at him from minute one. And like you said, it would have made good TV if he walked out and said, "Oh, I'm not doing this." But that's probably never going to happen with a book to promote. But it's just kind of common courtesy to be respectful to him, just a bit to be nice to him for 20 minutes or so, and then shift the agenda and say, right, we talked about the good times, now let's switch to the bad. The biggest kind of question from most people in the comments is why it was so short. I want to hear from Danny Harvey saying, quickest 40-minute podcast I've ever listened to. Could listen to Martin all day. He brought me the closest things to the glory days of watching Villa. Matthew, I was expecting something around 90 to 120 minutes long. It feels quite short compared to other interviews you've done. And one from 14N, who said the interview with John Gregory was 3 hours long. Martin O'Neill, the most fascinating period. Well, that was probably too long. Martin O'Neill, the most fascinating person in Villa's recent history, is only 40 minutes. What? Upload the uncut version now in capitals. There was one mini story that was cut out of that, and it's in the book, where he went on a little bit of a tangent about Martin Larsen's appearance fee, and Doug Ellis kind of moaning about, why did you bring him on as a sub for 5 minutes? Now I have to pay him the appearance fee. And he kind of started to talk about it, and we said, oh, we'll talk about that later, and we didn't. So I cut that like 20 seconds out. Everything else that was in that podcast was everything that he said in the room. There was no kind of stories cut out or things taken away and be saved for later or anything. Everything that we aired is everything that he said. And that's kind of what doesn't make it a 10 out of 10 for me, is going, I've thrown away a page of questions. I wanted an hour and a half. I wanted to ask this. I wanted to delve deeper. And we kind of went from, right, so you had the League Cup upset and Phil Dowd, etc. And then we had to pause to reset the cameras. And then we were like, right, you've got about 10 minutes left. And it was like, whoa, okay. And it cuts back to you, and I think you say something like, so James Milner was the kind of catalyst for you leaving, and it looks like a bad edit.
You're saying that was all, that we recorded everything that was said in the room. I think you had a bit of small talk with him while I made a cup of tea. And then he had a bit of small talk with me about Unai Emery, saying positive things about Unai Emery. We wanted it to be done face-to-face because we thought it would make a better interview. And,
it does.
We haven't really been able to get out and about as much as we like, and that's reawakened us a little bit, hasn't it, to say we want to try and do more of these face-to-face ones. So getting it face-to-face was important, so that limited the time anyway, although we did have a little bit more time left on the room that we booked. But also, I think it was Ben Foster's fault, wasn't it? I think he was disappearing to Leamington Way, I think, to go on Ben Foster's podcast. So
yeah, we were filming and ready and set up, and he was 10 or 15 minutes late because he was in a previous interview before us, and then he came to us, and then, like I said, our cameras run for 30 minutes, which is a common thing, I think, and you have to kind of stop and start again. So I go, right, tap you on the shoulder. We're at 29 minutes. I'll stop it and start it, and then it's like, right, well, we're leaving at 1 for our taxi, and you said to me, oh, what time is it now? And I was like, 10 to. So that's the way we have to kind of scrap everything. So if we'd known in advance, we've got 40 minutes, we probably would have cut out some of the questions in the first part and not asked them in the first place and jumped to the end. The fact that it was a little bit of an unknown of how long we're actually going to get with him was probably a little bit of a kind of a limitation on our part. We should have made that very clear at the start. How long have we got here? No, to be fair to him.
Just basics.
Oh, no, yeah. Yeah. Embarrassing, really. But I know O'Neill himself and his character and his personality, and kind of people questioning, what was he actually like? Was it kind of this spiky relationship? And you can mention that in a sec. But in terms of him, he walked into the room. He was very friendly. He was very nice. He shook hands. Said somebody asked me actually in the trailer, you can see him like put his hands up for a sec, and it cuts to black or whatever. And he's like, "What was on O'Neill's hands?"
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
Pleased to see you.
After all these years.
It's been a while, hasn't it?
Right. Sorry, the reason my hands just did that cream stuff.
Oh, that's all right. Keep looking young. Can we sit you in here, Mark?
You said at one point, you said something like, "Oh, I don't want to dig up kind of old ground or whatever." And he was like, "No, ask what you want, say what you want." And there was no kind of limitations from his part and his PR people, whoever, to say, you can't ask this, you can't say that. Again, like another bit of a semi-regret that we could have asked anything, but we just ran out of time to ask what we really wanted.
In terms of how he was like with me, pretty much what you saw, to be honest, friendly, but with a kind of a steely kind of, I don't know, there's a hierarchy there, I think. Otherwise, in his mind anyway. I'm less scared of him as I was than I was. Although that's probably if he does come back on again, I will be equally scared again. But he was just Martin, wasn't he? I think the thing that took me was when you do presses and when I've met him before and stuff, never the best at kind of maintaining eye contact for some reason. That was what struck me previously. But
you aren't. He isn't.
He wasn't, but
Okay.
with me, maybe it was, he just doesn't want to look at his face. But I felt it was a bit more engaging. I felt we could. I'm glad we did it in the same room because you could feel that. I'm not sure it would have been. I'm not sure you'd have got that down a Zoom call if we'd have done as via a Zoom call.
Well, one of our sister sites, the Nottingham Post, did an interview with him as well for the Forest podcast that we do, and I produced it for them because it was done over Zoom, and it was a different vibe, and obviously Forest and Villa, it's a different conversation entirely. But again, the way we talked about setting the room up and how we're going to film it, I thought it was good and important to have you sat face to face rather than sat next to each other. And it's such a minor thing because it's only two of you on screen, but rather than being sat side by side and looking at each other, to be sat opposite a table and kind of look each other in the eye and kind of battle it out and thrash it out, that was more important to me because I just thought, you've got to have that kind of relationship to kind of look him in the eye and say what you think, because again, we didn't quite know what to expect.
I don't know, I found a little bit sad, I suppose, was the fact when he said, I still have to get, when I've come back to Villa with Ireland, I have to be ushered through quietly, sneaked in through the back door at Villa Park, and I shouldn't have to for what I've achieved. I shouldn't have to. And I don't know, it'll be interesting to see in the comments on this one, what do people think? Can you ever see a day where Martin O'Neill is paraded, kind of interviewed on the pitch by the stadium announcer and, kind of given a round of applause from all four sides of Villa Park? I don't know. It'd be interesting to see whether people think that would happen or should happen.
I'm going to wrap this up there and let you go because I know you've got another meeting in a second. We're almost at the stage where this behind the scenes is longer than the Martin O'Neill interview, which will annoy me even more for some reason. So I'm going to call it a day.
Well, there's so much more I wanted to ask, Dan.
There really is. Again, we could talk about the interview for another hour because he's so interesting. So that's my overarching feeling, that I'm just slightly frustrated it wasn't longer, but I still think I said it was like a 6.5, 7 out of 10 on the way back after we filmed it. Once I'd edited it together and I've seen the reaction, I'll go 8 out of 10. Still room for improvement, but better than I thought.
We'll know this when we get Remy Gard, won't we?
Oh, God, imagine. If you've got 33 minutes into the behind the scenes and you've not seen it, that'd be quite weird, but I am going to end this podcast with the trailer. So if you've not seen it, here's a little taster, and then I'll leave the link down below to go and watch the full thing. If you have watched it, thank you for your feedback. Thanks for your comments. We both appreciate it. And we'll see you again in a couple of days. Cheers, everyone.
Yeah. Does it still
Of course. Of course it does.
Me too.
Absolutely. It really rankles with me because it's a sending off offence. It's the rule of the game. I was desperately wanting Aston Villa to get into the Champions League, which is what I thought all the Villa fans would want it. This was the last 32 of a competition. We're playing a lot of games that season. If leaving at the football club taints everything about it, there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. Would I change? Would I do it differently? Absolutely.